Hello, General Biology, and welcome to screencast number 3. And this is section 4.2 of chapter 4, Climate, and we've been talking about herbivore-plant relationships. And I was just so excited. I was talking, and so into what I was teaching that I didn't realize I had gone 18 minutes in, and I had to truncate it back to 14 minutes and 57 seconds, so I cut off my last sentence. So I was saying that, for example, very dense populations of white-tailed deer are eliminating their favorite food plants from many places across the United States. But, as I was getting ready to say, and I left off with the but, what happens is when they're eating their plants, the seeds actually get caught in their fur, and they travel to another place, they drop off, and those seeds will germinate and be ready for next season. So there's kind of a catch-22 with that. Alright, so I was talking about keystone species, and you didn't hear it because I had to cut it off. So we're going to talk about keystone species again, and sometimes there's changes in a population that are a result of a single species, and that's called a keystone species because they can have these dramatic changes in the whole structure of the community. So one of these examples is with otters, the sea otters. Sea otters, their favorite food are sea urchins. And sea urchins, they live on the Pacific coast, and they actually eat kelp in the kelp forests. So what happens is these sea otters, they'll eat the urchins, and it'll help maintain the kelp forest. But what happened is they noticed about a century ago most of the sea otters were being eliminated because of hunting. They liked them for their fur. So what happened is when the numbers of the sea otters went down, the kelp forests nearly vanished because the sea urchins just continued to reproduce and they continued to eat the kelp. And kelp is important in a lot of ways because, one, it adds a little bit of safety for some fish that if they're swimming away from a predator, they can hide within the kelp. It adds as a nursery for other organisms to lay their eggs, fish and crabs and things like that that occupy the ocean floor. It's a food source, obviously, for the kelp. It also helps with slowing the wave currents down so that they don't erode at the beaches. So it's got a lot of important things. So when the sea otters were almost hunted out, they nearly lost the kelp, and they lost breeding areas and safety areas, and all these problems came up. So what happened was they realized that the otters were actually a keystone species, that they ate the urchins so that the urchins wouldn't eat too much kelp and it maintained the kelp forest. So they put the otters on the endangered species list, and as soon as they did, the kelp forest started to grow back, the sea urchin numbers went down, and the otters began to thrive again, and the area began to thrive as well. So because the otters had such an impact in that area, they are known as a keystone species. Now, for some reason, and we're not sure, the population is beginning to fall again, so ecologists are going out there and they're trying to find out what is causing this population to decline. The next type of niche that I want to talk about with you is called symbiosis. And symbiosis is where you have organisms that live in close relationship with each other, and they can benefit from that relationship. They can not have any reaction to that relationship. They neither benefit nor decline from it, and then they can decline but not necessarily die from the relationship. So we're going to look at three primary ways that organisms depend on each other, And we're going to recognize those three ways in symbiotic relationships that come into three main classes: mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. And that's what we're going to be talking about next. So any relationship, if we define this with two species that live closely together, is called symbiosis. And that's what symbiosis means, living together. So as I mentioned, we have three main classes of symbiotic relationships: mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. So we're going to start with mutualism. And mutualism is where both species benefit from the relationship in some way. So you remember Finding Nemo, one of my favorite movies, and Merlin, they lived in a sea anemone. And the sea anemone had little stinging cells on it, and they were immune to those stinging cells. When they came into the anemone, they would actually bring food. The anemone, because the stinging cells, would actually protect the clownfish. So it was a mutual relationship. They got protection, the clownfish, and the anemone got its food. Okay, that is a predator-prey, not a predator-prey, oh my gosh, that is a mutualistic relationship where both benefit. Can you think of another mutualistic relationship that you might be familiar with? How about bees and flowers? Flowers are actually rooted to the ground, and they're sexual beings, so they can't actually pick up their roots and find a mate, so they have to rely on bees. So bees fly in and they pick up the pollen, which is the male reproductive cell, and when they pick that up, they can take it to another flower and they drop it in the female part of the flower, and reproduction happens. So those bees benefit the flowers. What did the bees get in turn? They get nectar. They get nectar to make honey. So that's mutualistic. They both benefit and they don't harm or cause any deficit to the other organism. So when we see this kind of relationship where they both benefit, that is known as mutualism. Parasitism is another type of symbiotic relationship, and I have some really cool samples that I'm going to be showing you in class with this. And tapeworms is one of the examples that I will be able to show you. And tapeworms actually live inside the intestines of mammals. They can live inside the intestines of humans. And when a human digests the food, the tapeworms will absorb large amounts of the food that's in their host. So what winds up happening is their host winds up getting deprived some of the nutrients. Now, they don't intentionally want to kill the host because they'd be killing their food source. They would be killing the place where they live, but they can weaken the host and make the host sick and susceptible to disease. We have several different kinds of parasites like tapeworms, but fleas and ticks and lice and a leech. They are all different types of parasites that live on the bodies of mammals, and they feed on their skin and their blood. So these are examples of parasites, relationships in which one organism lives inside or on another organism. It harms it, but it doesn't do it with the intention to kill it. It just weakens it, and something else would kill it. Parasitism. The parasite is going to obtain all or part of its nutritional needs from the host. And as I said, they generally they will weaken, but they do not kill their host. The host is usually much larger than the parasite. So we think about roundworms or heartworms that dogs can get and cats can get. Those are parasites. Their intent is not to kill, which they can, but it's to get their food source from that. The other type of symbiotic relationship is commensalism. And commensalism is where you've got an organism living on another organism, and it neither benefits or harms the other organisms. So one of these examples is barnacles. Barnacles will attach themselves to the skin of whales, and as barnacles, what they do is they filter feed through the water. So as the whale swims, they're going to be able to feed at various locations wherever that whale happens to go. This is commensalism. The skin is so thick on the whale that the whale doesn't even know it has the barnacles attached to it. It doesn't even hurt it. And the barnacles benefit because they can filter out the food particles that are in the water. Okay, so that ends this section, and we will go into section 4.3. I hope you're finding this interesting.